Well, another quick welcome from me. My name's Tim. If we haven't met before, I'm the lead pastor here. It's our privilege to host you this morning and to welcome you into our community. I was having a conversation with a friend a few weeks ago about some relational challenges I was having. It's none of you. I'll just leave it at that. This person looked at me after I kind of chatted with them for a little while, and they said, "Wow, you're a really patient person." Which is weird, because nobody's ever called me that before. It was a different perspective on myself than I often have. I don't think about myself as a patient person, because people don't usually call me a patient person. But it highlighted something really interesting for me, that perception is that person's reality. It doesn't matter how I think about myself in that moment, how they think about me can differ. It doesn't really matter what the truth is in that moment. Perception is somebody's reality. The truth of who we are in a given moment is not as relevant sometimes as how people perceive who we are in that same moment, right? Over the last number of weeks, we've been mining this one particular verse out of the book of Exodus, Exodus chapter 34, verse 6. And we call the series Who is God? Because this is a statement that God uses more often than any other in Scripture to define himself. So if we were looking to God to inform our understanding of who he is, it's at least as likely as anything else that God might say, "I am compassionate and gracious, slow to anger and overflowing with loyal love and faithfulness." So we have already looked at, put that back up there for me, compassionate and gracious. Last week, Melissa looked at loyal love and faithfulness, And today we're going to look at this idea of slow to anger, which you'll notice is not the last thing in the verse, but I saved it for last. And you might ask yourself, why? Well, to be honest, I think it's maybe the one that we're most divided over. And to be really honest, that sort of makes me nervous a little bit. I actually think that this morning, unfortunately, I have to come up against some of your perceptions of reality, because I've encountered at least two large camps when it comes to talking about the anger of God. On the one hand, I've encountered a group of Christians who seem to really like the idea of God being very angry. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but it seems like there's a camp of people who are like eager for God to dole out judgment and death and lightning bolts and turning people into pillars of salt. Like, these are their favorite scripture verses. They seem to be overly okay with an angry version of Yahweh. And then there's a group of people who want nothing to do with Yahweh, our God, the God of the Bible, because he sometimes gets angry at things. And so they run in the complete other direction, and they don't listen, and they don't engage. Right? And there's obviously a continuum in between there. But those two big groups, I realize that there's some people in here today who fall under both of those camps. And unfortunately, I'm probably going to have to challenge your perception of reality if that's where you are. And that makes me a little bit nervous, but it's my job, so I'm here for it. Let's go. Ready? Remember that this passage comes at a particular part of the story of the Bible. It's the first time where the people of Israel enter into this cyclical relationship. This plays itself out over and over and over again. It especially defines the Torah, the ancient Hebrew, first 5 books of our Bible, where God comes and he offers people relationship, and the people say yes, but then they figure out what God actually wants for them, and they don't do it, and God kind of gets annoyed, And they ask for forgiveness, and he forgives them. Okay? It just happens over and over and over again in the Old Testament. Okay? Especially in the first 5 books of the Bible. This is the first time at the bottom of Mount Sinai, God says, here's the 10 commandments. Do this thing. And they're like, yeah, cool. You took too long. So we're going to fashion ourselves our own God, and we're going to break the first commandment right off the bat. And then God gets kind of annoyed, and he expresses an annoyance to Moses. And Moses then, says, hey, God, why don't we give them another chance? And he's like, yeah, that sounds like a really great idea. And they keeps going on and on and on. It's really important for us to remember, because God's character, the thing that he put into this verse, is shown every time. The people make a bad choice, and God decides to respond to them through compassion and grace and loyal love and faithfulness, even though he's upset with what they did. In this particular case, slow to anger, we've looked at kind of the Hebrew words every time we've broken these things down, is actually a metaphor in ancient Hebrew. So slow to anger is translated literally long of nose. Okay? Now, if you're not a pasty, pale individual like myself, you might miss this metaphor. But let me explain it to you. If you are the kind of skin hue that I have in particular, okay, when you get excited or angry, your face turns red. Like really red. And even when you're trying not to be angry, you can't help but your face turning red. And your children will say, Dad, why are you so red in the face? The idea here is that the redness starts at the tip of your nose, okay, and takes over your face from there. I don't know if that's physiologically how it actually happens, but that's the idea behind the metaphor. So if one was long of nose, and the anger started way out here at the tip of your nose, it takes a whole lot longer for it to turn your face red, okay? That's the idea that we're looking at here. It's kind of funny, but, if you're the kind of person who turns especially crimson when you get angry, then it makes sense to you. When does God get angry? God gets angry almost exclusively at human evil. That's the thing that triggers God's long nose. When the tip turns red, it's almost always because people have done really, really terrible things. Like, let's look at this particular story that we're in the middle of, right? Because we're at the end of the book of Exodus almost, but Exodus has a beginning. Do you remember how Exodus starts? Exodus starts when Pharaoh mass murders the children of Israel. That made God angry. He was not okay with that. And so he recruits Moses to be his emissary to the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, to express that God is unhappy and displeased with the way that Pharaoh has decided to treat the people now. Because remember, the people are there because Joseph saved Egypt from famine. He led them through a period that was going to mean the death of thousands and thousands of people in Egypt. But enough time had passed from Joseph to where we find ourselves in Exodus. And he felt threatened by their growth in spite of the fact that they were all slaves now. He was threatened by them. And so he was trying to essentially cull the people of Israel back so that they wouldn't be a threat to the people of Egypt. Incidentally, this is like bonus theological material, okay? This is totally just for interest's sake because the Bible is cool, okay? Do you recognize this pattern of behavior from the book of Matthew at all? That Matthew starts out with Herod killing all the young boys? A huge part of the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, next time you read it, you have to read Jesus as taking the place of Moses. I'm just leaving it there. Okay, that was my Bible nerd part for the day. Take that and run with it. It'll change the way that you read Matthew. Try and find Moses in Jesus every time you read Matthew. Okay, good. We're going to keep going. So, can God ignore now what has gone on in Egypt? Can a good God ignore the mass murder of the children of Israel? Well, a couple of weeks ago, we decided that the scriptures say that God can't even look at any evil. So he doesn't get the luxury of ignoring what happens here. So what does he do? He gives Pharaoh 10 chances to repent and let the people go. 10 different opportunities to let them go before he takes ultimate action against them. I just want you to put yourself in a position like if it was, and I know this is difficult, if it was your kid who had been involved in a mass killing of some kind, and our system of justice decided to offer that person 10 opportunities to repent and so they would be released. How would you feel about that? 10 chances for a mass murderer to go free. I'm guessing none of us are okay with that. And yet that's exactly how God treats Pharaoh on behalf of the people of Egypt. 10 opportunities, in spite of his anger, in spite of the fact that he can't ignore it. He is a God of compassion and graciousness and slow to anger, but overflowing with faithfulness. So if our own moral standard tells us that this is extraordinary kindness and graciousness, why are we often so hard on God when we talk about him being angry? Why do we hold God to a different standard than we hold ourselves to? Because we're just people, and our understanding is finite and limited. But yet, this God who we believe created the universe and has a far larger perspective than us, it's not okay that he's not okay with evil? My best guess on this one is that we wrestle with the fact that we believe God could intervene, but he doesn't. And we struggle to understand that, I think. We struggle to understand why doesn't God just jump in. I would say one answer we already gave in this series, which was like, in order to get rid of all human evil, he'd have to get rid of all the humans. And he's not willing to do that. Right? He made us. He loves us. In spite of our flaws, he's for us. Our perception, remember that? Perception is that by God not intervening, he has no love or care or concern about us, but in fact, it's the exact opposite. So here's something we need to understand. Perception is not reality. Perception is not reality. Our point of view is wildly limited compared to God's point of view. Right? And I understand. I'm asking you to, essentially, you have to believe that there is a God. You have to believe that there's a being who created the universe in order for that to fly, but we're going to take that as like a granted here in this particular space. That's another conversation we could have at some other time. But what we see as the whole picture, compared to our concept and conception of God, is not the whole picture. And part of a journey of faith is learning to trust God when our point of view is limited. We have to understand that most of the time when the Bible talks about God getting angry, he's looking at human evil. And you know what his response is most of the time? It's going to get out of the way. He's going to let you experience the consequences of the poor choices that we make. Right? So remember the cycle of the people of Israel? So they get an invitation, they say yes, God gives them some standards, they break the standard, they they break the rules. And most of the time what that comes down to is they actually don't want to serve God the way that he asked them to. They want to serve a conception of God that they or somebody else have made up. So in Exodus, it's the golden calf that they fashion out of all their jewelry, right? Sometimes it's them looking at another god in another culture and going, man, I'd rather serve that God because he lets me do X, Y, and Z. And you know what God does? He kind of goes, okay, you want to serve that God? Have at it. Oh, but by the way, that means you have to be enslaved by the people who serve that God. And they're going to force you to serve that God. They get what they ask for. And that's tough. It's tough for us to understand. So maybe like a fable in real life. Let's like take this out of the realm of like war and disaster and gods and famine and all of those things that, are biblical type stories. Let's just bring it down to like a fable of real life, okay? Hopefully this helps a little bit. This fable is called Pastor Tim versus the Roasted Chicken. It's a good one. A long, long time ago, in a place far, far away called Ontario, Pastor Tim and his family were living and serving at another church. And on Sundays, sometimes in the afternoon, the pastor's family is tired. We have this thing that we call the tradition of the holy nap. And when it's needed and it isn't given, things go wrong. So here we are on an afternoon where something else happened after church. We haven't had our holy nap. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we realize children enjoy eating, and we have no food in the house. So my wife asked me, honey, can you go to the store and get us some food for the evening? And I looked at her and said, honey, could you go to the store and get us some food for the evening? This went back and forth several times. Those of you who are married know that I lost. So I was privileged to go forage for food for my family at the local superstore. And so I went to Superstore and I got a bag of salad and a roasted chicken. Okay, you know the ones I'm talking about? They come in the plastic container with the little, cardboard handle on them. Okay, I took them up. I paid for them, but I did not pay for the plastic bag because I'm Dutch and 5 cents is too much for a bag I used to get for free. So I did not pay for the plastic bag. I took the bag of salad and the chicken. I got in my car. I drove home, all the while in a miserably foul mood because I hadn't had my nap, and I respond like a 3-year-old when I don't have my nap. So here I am getting out of the car. I drive home. I grab my phone. I grab the bag of salad. I grab the chicken. Okay? I turn towards the door, and in that moment, a plastic bag would have been a really good idea. Because that cardboard handle is not meant long for this world. Right? Right? It's flimsy. You all know this when you pick them up. Don't you pick them up and go, man, I probably should support this underneath. But I didn't do that because my other hand had a bag of salad in it. So as I turn to get out of the car, said cardboard handle betrays me. Breaks. The chicken container goes flying across my lap. It opens. I now have hot or warm chicken grease all over a pair of pants that I really like. And the chicken rolls out of the car and onto the floor. The ground outside. I am now angry at the chicken. So I get out of the car, and there is an unassuming maple tree right next to the car. Now I decide it will be a good idea if in my anger, I throw the cardboard handle that I'm now angry at the tree. As a relief. forgetting that my phone was in my hand. So right about here, the phone betrays me, as technology always wants to, and it flies at about a 70-degree angle, right over top of the maple tree, which should give you some idea of what velocity with which I tried to throw the cardboard at the tree. The phone goes over the tree and lands in the street. And do you remember all those videos they showed us about like how spit is dispersed into sneeze during COVID? Conical. That's exactly what my phone screen looked like as it hit the ground. Conically shaped. It must have been in literally a million pieces. Oh, you thought I was mad at the chicken before. No. Now my whole body had gone crimson. Not just my face. Forget the nose. The tips of my fingers are now angry. And I throw a proper fit in my front yard. And I said some things Pastor Tim should never say. And then I suddenly remembered that I live across the street from the YMCA, and all the windows and all the people working out can see me having this epic fit. So I managed to pull myself together just enough to get inside, where I realized that I have terrified my 4-year-old children. And they looked at me in a way that they have never, ever looked at me since. And I realized, man, did I mess up. The grocery store owed me a new chicken. And they gave me one when I went back, because I looked at them and I told them about their flimsy handle. And they gave me a chicken. I have a really serious question for you, though. Who owes me a new phone? Does God owe me a new phone? God could have stepped in and saved me from my stupidity. We believe that, right? Does God owe me a new phone? No. Of course he doesn't owe me a new phone. Right? You all agree with me? Does anybody think God owes me a phone? Don't put your hand up. It's the wrong answer. God does not owe me anything. Just because we believe that God has the capacity to come in and calm me down and snag my phone from midair and remove the grease stain from my pants doesn't mean he owed me anything. The store owed me a chicken, but God does not owe me a phone. I made my own choices. I have to deal with the consequences, and it is immeasurably unreasonable for us to think that God owes us a bailout each and every time we do something foolish. But you know what the irony, you know what the crazy thing is? That's exactly what he did when he sent Jesus. He gave you the bailout, and he gave all of us the bailout for every terrible and evil thing we have ever done or will ever do. God's grace through Jesus Christ is sufficient enough for every human being who has ever walked this earth. That is reality. So look, as we get to the end of this little journey that we've been on these 4 weeks, thinking about who God is, what's the point? I'm hoping that it will do some things for us, and it's not just a way for us to spend an hour on a Sunday morning. My first hope is that looking into the words that God uses to speak about himself, that our perception would get changed into a closer view of God's reality. That we would look deeply into our own lives and our own situations, that we would judge the way that we see the world through the lenses of who God says that he is, and that we would define our relationship not based on our feelings or our perceptions, but on the reality of who God says that he is. And then we would give him the chance to prove that this is exactly who he is. It's important because the biblical story is one of God putting his image into and onto every single one of you and every other person we'll ever meet and see in the world. And then being invited to be a part of the world's redemption and restoration. And the world needs that. Paul says in Romans that the entirety of creation eagerly awaits the awakening of the children of God. Our lives, if you're here and you're here because you've put your faith in Jesus, our lives are supposed to be defined by the life and character of God. And as Pastor Paul longed for the strangers in Rome to know this, our staff longs more deeply for those of you we love and know to be transformed and changed into the image of the God that we serve. You can take that to the bank. The world needs a church that knows how to sit, not at the edges, like totally afraid and unable to connect with God because sometimes God has an opinion and he speaks and expresses his displeasure with us, or on the far other side that we're way too eager to see the world burn. But to sit in the middle of it, to sit in the mystery of it, and to invite people to do the same. It's our purpose, friends. It feels like the world only values people who have chosen to live at the extreme edges of anything. That partisanism and division is how the world feels like it's moving, and it's getting worse all the time. And I am just convinced that somebody needs to be okay with going, it's easy to pick the most obvious and hard-lined choice and never put yourself in a position where you have to actually live for a minute in the gray moments of life. But that's where life is. And that's a church that we need to be not uncertain about the God that we serve, but certain enough that if God is slow to anger, we can take a beat sometimes too. That we can live in the midst of a God who is just and kind at the same time. So, my hope is that we won't take God's patience and long-suffering for granted, friends. Can we be eager for God's transforming power in our lives, just not for ourselves, but with a Christ-like heart desiring it for everyone? Today is just another day when we can stop and reach out and take hold of God's hand in a loving and sacrificial partnership, because the world needs to know this is how God defines himself. And no greater love has anyone than that he would lay down his life for his friends. Who is God? It's the one who came. It's the one who died and the one who lived a life so that you and I could have this hope of knowing him, being befriended by him, working with him, living with him. The band's going to come and they're going to do a final song for us. And it's one that I hope you'll take a moment to just think about as you sing. It's called Build My Life, and the invitation, again, is to build your life on the foundation that God has laid, on his compassion, on his grace, on his patience, on his love and his faithfulness. Let me encourage you, as they sing, to open up your hearts and take the moment to sing a song of declaration to him. Yes, I will choose again today to build my life on you. And you can take a moment if you want. There's room up here at the front if you need to just get in a different space, in a different position to pray. Myself and a couple of our other staff and anyone who wants to pray with someone this morning can just be available. Take the minute. Whatever God might be saying to you this morning, don't leave here without taking time to have a conversation, to hear his voice, to respond to him, to walk with him. Won't you stand with the band as they sing?